A mother named Alice notices that her little daughter always hides in her room whenever her husband is around, so she decided to install hidden camera, and the footage revealed the truth behind all this. The situation didn't seem right. Her gut told her it was true. She could not recall the last time her daughter had looked at her husband. Did something happen while she was away? She was afraid of finding out the truth. While checking the footage, she didn't realize what she was about to discover. There was going to be a major change in her life. Alice thought Valerie's habit of locking herself in her bedroom was normal at first. Growing up, she probably needed some alone time. A pattern began to emerge one day. Every time Alice and Valerie were alone, the door to the girl's bedroom was wide open. As soon as Alice's husband John returned home from work, all that changed. Her room was locked, and she refused to leave. One night, Alice discovered her daughter locking herself in her bedroom after John returned home from work, so she decided to intervene. There had been a strong sense of tension in their house for the last few weeks. Despite their daughter's concerns, Alice could tell she was being kept in the dark by her husband and daughter. There had been a strange and secretive streak in John's behavior lately. The dark filled Alice's living room that night as she sat on the couch. Neither her husband nor daughter were home, so she was left all alone. Immediately, she realized there was something wrong. After only a few months with John, Alice wondered if she made the right decision by marrying him. What happened between Valerie and John? When she thought about it, a shiver ran down her spine. However, what was she supposed to do about it? Her daughter pretended nothing was wrong whenever she was asked about it. Her question to John was shrugged off without a word, and he pretended that it was no big deal. After a few weeks, she became more suspicious, but she decided to act that night. Purchasing a hidden camera would enable her to find out what was going on. The next morning, she awoke with one task on her mind, and she was going to accomplish it before the end of the day. When her husband was leaving for work, she went to the closest tech store. In order to find out what was going on, she had to purchase a hidden camera. While Alice's daughter was in her room, she began installing the hidden camera in the living room. It was necessary for her to know what was happening while she was away. She knew her daughter's secret had something to do with the man she loved, and she knew it was important. When she saw the footage, her heart broke into millions of pieces. Alice Milano lived her entire life in Houston, Texas. Her life had not been an easy one, but she never lost her optimism. For the foreseeable future, she vowed to focus on her 5-year-old daughter after her first husband left her. Valerie, her daughter, was everything to her. Her little girl came first before anyone else. Throughout her life, Alice envisioned herself remaining single. In the aftermath of her first marriage, she vowed never to engage in a relationship with another narcissistic individual ever again. At a friend's dinner party, she spotted a particular person who caught her eye after 3 years of being single. It didn't take her long to realize that he was special the moment she saw his face. Her first impression of John was that he was the most attractive man she had ever seen. In addition to being charming, kind, and having perfect teeth, Alice found him to be extremely attractive. There were many glances exchanged between the two throughout the night. It took him a while, but he eventually approached her. "I'm John. It's nice to meet you," he smiled brightly. The moment he introduced himself, Alice's heart was stolen. They spoke for hours that night, and Alice was wonderstruck for the first time in years. When John asked for Alice's number, she quickly gave it to him. "I'll call you sometime. Maybe we could go out for dinner when you're available," he said. Alice couldn't help the rush of excitement that rushed through her. But there was one problem. Alice had her daughter when she was very young, and she couldn't help but wonder how John would feel about the fact that she had an 8-year-old daughter at home. She decided to tell him about Valerie on their first date. Alice's stomach was filled with butterflies as she waited for John's response. A wide grin appeared across his face. "That's awesome. I'd love to meet her," he said. Alice couldn't believe it. The pair went on a few more dates, and it was obvious that they belonged together. About 2 months after they met, Alice invited John to their house. It was time for John and Valerie to meet. From the second they began talking, it was obvious to Alice that Valerie loved the new man in her mother's life. For years, she swore never to date again, but now she was changing her mind. That night, after Valerie went to bed, Alice and John made their relationship official. The mother of one couldn't remember the last time she felt so good about a man. John was perfect, and she wanted him around forever. The pair got engaged just 6 months after they met, and although it was soon, Alice was certain that she was making the right decision. But a few months after their wedding, something changed. At first, Valerie spent every evening with her mother and stepfather. As soon as John got home from work, they would enjoy dinner as a family before relaxing in front of the television for a few hours before bed. But one day that changed. That day at 5 p.m. when John got home from work, Valerie wasn't waiting by the front door. Instead, she locked herself inside of her bedroom, requesting that her mother bring her dinner. Alice didn't think much of this. She assumed her daughter just wanted some alone time. Perhaps she was tired or cranky. This continued for a few weeks straight until one day when Alice noticed something odd. That night, John was working late. When 5 p.m. rolled around, she was surprised to find that Valerie wasn't inside of her room. Instead, she ate dinner with her mother and watched television. But when he got home a few hours later, something weird happened. As soon as Valerie heard John's keys in the front door, she shot up from the couch and rushed to her bedroom, shutting the door behind her and locking it. That was the first time Alice began to question the situation. But that night, when John came to sit beside Alice on the couch, something seemed different about the man. When Jenna asked how work was, he simply shrugged. It was good, he said. But he didn't know that he was a terrible liar and Alice was already on to him. After that night, something in their house changed. John began working late each night for the next few weeks, and each time he returned, Valerie would hide in her bedroom. It was becoming obvious to Alice that something wasn't right. But when she would ask her daughter about it, she would pretend that everything was fine. When she'd ask John, he'd shrug it off. But one night, while Alice sat alone in the living room, her mind began to wander. Had something happened between John and Valerie while she was out? Valerie never wanted to be around her stepdad anymore, and John had been working late each night. Was he trying to avoid her, or was he seeing someone else? Alice knew that he was lying about his whereabouts. Things had been different in their house for the last few weeks, and Alice felt like she was being left out of the loop. There seemed to be something they knew that she didn't. She thought about it until she found a solution. As the weeks passed, she grew more suspicious. But she made a decision that night. She was going to purchase a hidden camera, and she was going to get to the bottom of it. When she awoke the following morning, she had one task in mind, and she was going to complete it before the day was over. She exited bed the second she woke up and prepared for the day. She left for the closest tech store when her husband left for work. She needed to buy a hidden camera to get to the bottom of this. That afternoon, Alice began installing the hidden camera in the living room while her daughter was inside her room. She had to know what was going on while she wasn't around. Her daughter had been hiding a secret for weeks, and she knew it had something to do with the man she loved. But her heart broke into millions of pieces when she looked at the footage. Over the following weekend, while John and Valerie were both home, Alice went out intentionally one night. She wanted to see what they got up to when she wasn't there. She went to a friend's house, and together, they watched the footage on her friend's television. But as they watched, something strange happened that sent a chill down Alice's spine. At first, Valerie was in the living room, playing by herself, when suddenly she heard footsteps coming down the stairs. A second later, she ran for her room and locked the door behind her. John had come downstairs. Alice watched with wide eyes as John approached the front door and opened it. Alice was beyond confused when she saw Valerie's nanny on the other side of the door. "Valerie, I'm heading out for a bit, okay? The nanny is here," he yelled. Valerie responded with a short okay from her bedroom. As soon as John left the house, Alice's heart dropped. She knew she had to get home. Where on earth was John going? And why did Valerie hide from him like that? She excused herself and drove home as fast as possible. The second she walked through the front door, she headed for Valerie's shut door and knocked on it. The nanny was baffled when Alice told her to leave. She had some business to do. But when Valerie opened the door, she was surprised to see her mother's pale face. "You need to tell me what's going on right now. Why are you hiding from John? Did something happen between you two?" The little girl frowned, confused by her mother's question. She simply shook her head. "If I tell you, you can't tell John," Valerie said, her voice small. Alice's stomach twisted as she waited for an explanation. Without a word, Valerie stepped away from the door and headed back into her room. A second later, she returned with something in hand. Alice was confused as she stared down at the handmade car and macaroni picture frame. "I've been making John something for Father's Day, and I didn't want him to see it until it was done," she explained plainly. Alice let out the breath she didn't know she was holding. She wanted to laugh at herself for ever being so worried. But then she remembered John. Why had he been acting so weird? And where was he right now? Alice waited for hours until her husband got home, and when he did, she confronted him. For weeks he claimed to be working late, but she knew better than to believe him. As soon as he stepped through the door, she asked for an explanation. He seemed dumbfounded as he stared at the woman he loved. It was clear that Alice knew that something was going on. He decided to come clean. "I need to show you something," he said, and turned his back to his wife. He lifted his shirt, revealing a massive, half-done tattoo. The massive tattoo said family and had two flowers beside it. One was Alice's favorite flower. The other was Valerie's. "I've been getting this done in honor of you and Valerie. I wanted it to be a surprise once it was done, he revealed. Alice had to blink back tears as she embraced her husband. In the end, nothing was as bad as she thought it was.